Let's trace...
Laurier encourages critical thinking. It encourages this openness to different ideas. It's a warm and welcoming environment.
The president issued this apology. It really upset me, even more than what Lindsay Shepherd did, and that is playing hate speech. Hate speech that says people like me, like you, should not exist in the classroom, literally. But the fact is that I was upset because the president didn't even mention we existed. There was no reference to trans people. There was no reference to non-binary people. There was only free speech. There was only Lindsay Shepherd. There was only apologizing to this person who thought it was okay to violate the Ontario Code of Human Rights, who thought it was okay to violate the spirit of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, to violate the university's gender discrimination policy. And all I heard from the president and the board of governors, as was pointed out from Ethan, is they don't give a shit. That's all I heard.
A letter to the president regarding Wilfrid Laurier University's apology to Lindsay Shepherd on the issue of Dr. Jordan Peterson's remarks. Dear President McLatchie, my name is Kira Williams. I'm a PhD candidate in geography at Wilfrid Laurier University and a transgender woman. This email serves as a response to your apology to Lindsay Shepherd, as well as Dr. Rambu Khanna's open letter. Specifically, it addresses the appropriateness of Dr. Peterson's political commentary in the classroom. I argue that while I sympathize with Lindsay Shepherd's position, your actions blatantly ignore trans-related violence and your part in fostering it by failing to make even the most basic acknowledgement of our existence or the hatred of Dr. Peterson's speech. It is trans people who, therefore, deserve an apology from you. Now, I don't think we can understate the role of the apology in Canadian culture, academic community. Now, doing a little digging into the Wilfrid Laurier academic community, I found a political science faculty publication titled Official Apologies. The abstract reading, "In favor of official apologies for past wrongs. One can argue that while guilt or fault is an attribute held by an individual only if she has actually committed a harmful act, responsibility is another matter. Membership in a corporate entity," presumably they mean anything from a small business to an entire racial group, "means the individual shares in the entity's responsibility to ameliorate," love that word, ameliorate the consequences of injustices that it perpetrated. This person's got excellent vocab. The corporate entity bears this moral responsibility even if its actions or lack of action were legal at the time they occurred. Moreover, the human dignity of those whom the entity has wronged is at stake and overrides any damages to the human dignity of individual members of the corporate entity that might be a consequence of the apology. That's very interesting. If no apology for the harm is offered, then the wronged are not recognized as morally equal human beings, deserving of respect from those who wrong them. Even if the actual victims are dead, their descendants may still suffer from the grievous wrongs inflicted on their ancestors and still be in need of quote-unquote moral resolution. Now, I recognize in this little abstract the same sort of argument that's being made by the PhD student, Kira Williams, specifically right here. The human dignity of those whom the entity has wronged is at stake, the human dignity, which goes to say basically their existence as human beings, or as dignified human beings. If no apology for the harm is offered, then the wronged are not recognized as morally equal human beings, which just goes to say that they do not exist as human beings, deserving of respect from those who wrong them.
Within the classroom happen again, because that's pissed. About like horrible things, because the fact is that not only as a trans person, but also as a woman, like, we're silenced about these issues. We can't talk to others around us, especially not people whom we can feel we can trust. Every day we just have to go to work. We have to go into our classes and pretend like everything is okay. And that brings us down to Lindsay Shepherd. So let's ignore Lindsay Shepherd. I really don't give a shit. She already got an apology. She's good. Thanks. And now I want to talk about what really matters, which is about the trans-related violence that nobody apparently seems to be talking about, whether it's columnists and newspapers who think they know everything about trans issues, some of whom have apparently interviewed me and not known a single thing about what it's like to be trans, which really, really disappoints me. Or from the administration of this university, who apparently can't even issue an apology or whatever the hell that was yesterday. I don't know if you saw it, but I was like, wow, so queer people exist, I guess. That's pretty good. And I even think I saw the word trans, like, once somewhere in there. And the university was almost like mocking. It was like, oh, well, of course we'll defend, like, queer people. And, like, not even pointing out that this was specific violence against us.
Back to the open letter. As a graduate student, I sympathize with and have compassion for Lindsay Shepherd's position. I agree that teaching assistants should have reasonable freedom to instruct students, and that sometimes this may involve teaching political, quote-unquote, controversies. I believe that we should receive appropriate support and understanding from our professors within reason, even where we may politically disagree. I can see how Lindsay likely saw and intended her actions to be conducive to student critical thinking and learning. However, you, Lindsay, and Dr. Rambukkana have blatantly ignored trans-related violence in this case. Regardless of his academic position, Dr. Peterson's remarks do not simply represent, quote-unquote, free speech, but hate speech, not in quotes, directed toward trans people such as myself. He has repeatedly affirmed not only denying trans people fundamental human rights, like using the bathroom or being correctly gendered, but used free speech as a justification for these dehumanizing actions. All right. So being correctly gendered, and I'm pretty sure Dr. Peterson will call you a she if you want to be a she, or he if you want to be a he. I think his problem, or his contention at least a year and a half ago, or whenever it was against invented pronouns, because he was suspicious of who was inventing them, and the use of they and them as singular pronouns. That's his position, which I don't think is on the same level as denying somebody the ability to use the bathroom. Plus, I don't think anybody doesn't want trans people to use the bathroom. There's just a question of which bathrooms, which I don't want to enter into that debate, but I think that it's conflating things to say that people don't want them to actually go potty. I don't think that's ever been the case. That would be egregious. By advocating the denial and, here we go, erasure of trans people, Dr. Peterson implicitly advocates subtle, institutionalized forms of violence against us. He also indirectly encourages direct acts of violence done by others, being beaten in the street, murdered, sexually assaulted, verbally harassed, and denied access to public facilities. All right, because Dr. Peterson has a different view on legalizing gendered pronouns, he's indirectly encouraging beating people up in the streets, murdering and sexually assaulting people, as well as verbally harassing them and denying them access to public facilities. This is an abuse of even the conception of implicit biases or implicit belief structures or implicit in any sort of implicitness in the human interaction. This is an abuse of that by using that implicitness to project your own fear onto somebody else and say, you are indirectly causing this thing. Why? Because I feel that you are. I feel implicitly that you are. As a PhD student, I wonder if she is being taught how to substantiate such claims, or if she's learning how to use implicitness to not need to substantiate your claims. To continue, such violence is the lived reality of being trans in modern Canadian society, whose hatred works through both individual actions and social institutions. All right, Canada is absolutely on the forefront of confronting trans issues. They are absolutely on the forefront. And here, like we see at Evergreen, that entity which is actually the most liberal is breeding individuals who want to tear it down for not being liberal enough. In the progressive sense. So yeah, let's say progressive. So the institution that is most progressive, a la Evergreen, a la Canada, is breeding people who want to tear it down for not being progressive enough. And likening its progress to actually no progress at all, but still fomenting violence. What kind of violence? Indirect violence, implicit violence, and murders and beating people on the street and sexually harassing them. It is all too easy for you, Lindsay, Dr. Rambukkana, or Dr. Peterson, to sit in your relatively safe and comfortable positions as cisgender women and men and decide whose lives and politics matter more, trans people or freedom of speech. This is because it is not you, but I, who will have to live through the consequences of your actions. And in this way, not only have you put the right to free speech above our fundamental rights to life and safety, but neither you, Lindsay, nor Dr. Rambukkana have mentioned trans people even once. She really wants a mention. Maybe she just wants a retweet. Would that satisfy her need for validation of her existence? You have failed to acknowledge that we are the real targets of Dr. Peterson. You have failed to apologize for the violence promoted by sharing his hate speech in the classroom. You have even failed to point out our very existence. This person is very, very keen on being recognized as existing. So I hope by reading her work, she is validated in her existence. It is as if we are invisible to all of you while you, in part, determine the fate of our lives and well-being. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Trans people deserve an apology. We deserve an apology from you, Lindsay, and from Dr. Rambukkana. We deserve to hear that ideologues calling for hatred against us will not be played in the classroom. We deserve for you to not simply brush off quote-unquote controversial as if it had no impact on us. Your controversy is my being solicited for sex at night. Your controversy is my being restricted from medical care I need. This is an issue. This is a valid issue. Your controversy is my being physically attacked on the street. So you see, your controversy is my life. And I refuse to sit by while you make that choice that the lives of trans people are less important than your political discomfort. I've heard this a lot at Evergreen. Talking about discomfort, but being wildly discomforted by certain ideas. I honestly expect better from Wilfrid Laurier University in this case. It suffices to say, though, I'm disappointed in you all. Wow. Trans people deserve an apology, but I don't expect you, President McClatchy, Lindsay Shepherd, Dr. Rambukkana, or Dr. Peterson will ever give one. My last resort is to file this letter as a symbol of protest against your actions. Sincerely, Kirill Williams, PhD candidate, Wilfrid Laurier University. So what can we say about that? How can I add to that? So there is an inflation of language that occurs when one wants their issue front and center. So the issue is about freedom of speech. The original issue was that Lindsay was showing some thing and wanted to have a discussion on it, and she was taken aside, and the manner in which she was treated when she was taken aside was egregious, at least for me. And for a lot of people who are watching me and who are watching this whole controversy unfold. That was the issue. The issue about, are we willing and able to have clearly open debate about issues, or do we need to contextualize everything as harmful or unharmful, or do we need to see things as harmful before we even talk about them or explore them? That was the controversy. Now, because it had something to do with gender pronouns, the trans rights issue people, well, this trans person is attaching herself to this other issue and then making a dichotomy out of that issue and trying to lift herself up to the status of Lindsay Shepherd. And why would you want to do that? If I'm ungenerous, I say, well, you're kind of just envious of this other person's attention. You're envious of this other issue. You want your issue front and center. You want to stop being murdered and beaten and solicited for sex. You want all these things to happen. And you think that one of the ways for that to happen is for gender pronouns to be explicit within the law as a hate crime for not using certain words to talk about people who are not even there. Correction. By referring to the person who's not even there, I'm not saying that the person who's being spoken of in the third person does not exist, but rather isn't present at the moment that we're speaking about the person in the third person. So this gender pronoun issue is really weird because it has to do with talking about somebody who's not present. Not that they don't exist, but they're not present. And that might be where this student is a little bit confused about the issue. And you think that calling that hate is actually going to decrease your discomfort in life and your valid discomfort. And so debating that is getting in the way of you achieving that which you want to achieve, which would be a good life that's free from harm and free from violence and free from discrimination. I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the case if you act like this when you're trying to get other people to change their attitude. If you really want people to change your attitude, you act in a virtuous manner. You act forgiving and you act loving. And with regards to any sort of cultural thing, you invite people in. You don't make rooms where you separate yourself from other people and make safe spaces which act as filters for anything that is different than what you quantify as safe, that you stop using words like hate, that you stop asking for people to acknowledge your existence, because who really demands somebody to acknowledge their existence? I mean, it's somebody who's worked a lot on playgrounds. It's little babies who just demand, I exist, I exist, I exist, I exist. And it's really hard to respect somebody, and therefore really hard to respect their cause if they're acting in a manner that is unbecoming, that isn't noble in and of itself. So if your cause is noble, you should be acting as noble, if not more noble than your cause is, because that nobility that you act will generate empathy and sympathy. And when attention does eventually land on you, people will actually rally behind you, especially in Canada. Canadians love heroes. Canadians love apologetic and yet very beautiful people like their president, Justin Trudeau. Somebody's going to correct me on that. I know a bunch of Canadians. They're very nice, polite people. And if you're polite to them, they're going to totally respect you. And they're actually bending their laws way out of whack, I think, to progress with this progressive ideology. And then to quash the debate against it. And by acting in this way and not really as a leader, right? If you really want your cause to shine, then you need to act as a leader, and a leader has a thick skin, and a leader knows how to inspire people, and a leader knows how to bring people together. And shouting at people and calling them hate-filled murderers is not the way to bring people together. That is my thoughts on that.